Golfing with Monkeys. Now, there's a title that tells you absolutely nothing about where I'm going this morning unless you know the story. How many of you know the story? Raise your hands. Great. The best and most receptive congregations are those that are clueless. Here is the story. The Reverend Gregory Knox Jones, a Presbyterian minister who serves the congregation in Northern Virginia, tells the story. I quote him. Once the English had colonized India and established their businesses there, they yearned for recreation and decided to build a golf course in Calcutta. Golf in Calcutta, however, would prove to present a unique obstacle. Monkeys from a nearby natural habitat would drop out of the trees, scurry across the course, and seize those little white balls. The monkeys would play with the balls, tossing them here and there. At first, Knox writes, the golfers tried to control the monkeys. Their first strategy was to build high fences around the fairways and greens. This approach, which seemed initially to hold some promise, was abandoned when the golfers discovered that a fence is no challenge to an ambitious monkey. Next, the golfers tried luring the monkeys away from the course, but the monkeys found nothing as amusing as watching those humans go wild whenever these little white balls were disturbed. In desperation, the British began trapping and relocating the monkeys, but mysteriously, for every monkey they carted off, another would appear. Finally, the author writes, the golfers gave in to reality and established a rather novel ground rule for that particular course. Golfers in Calcutta were obliged to play the ball wherever the monkey dropped it. And then the Reverend Knox reflects. As you can imagine, playing under this rule could be absolutely maddening. A beautiful drive shot right down the middle of the fairway could be picked up by a monkey and dropped deep in the rough. Or conversely, the opposite could happen. A bad slice or a wicked hook, which had produced a miserable lie, might be flung back right into the middle of the fairway. The unpredictable monkeys then brought equal measures of unpredictable, gratuitous bad luck or good luck to the game. Now, I've been a preacher for a long time, and when I first came across this story, I knew there was a sermon in it. And that's because life is so often like this. I want to reflect on this story about the mischievous monkeys who inserted themselves capriciously into what was an orderly game, because I believe it is a telling and spiritually instructive metaphor for the lives we have to live in this very unpredictable universe of ours. Several points about the story. First, the obvious truth of life's utter unpredictability, its frequent randomness, and if you will, its perpetual unfairness. For almost, I think, as soon as we human beings begin to think about life as children, we think, despite the abundant and remarkable evidence to the contrary, we like to think that just as every golf course has rules which the players should observe and obey so that they can successfully finish the game, that in the game of life we imagine there are also similar rules that will help us navigate our way through the course. Most of us, even in adulthood, have this tape that still plays, and it goes something like this. See if this sounds familiar to you. If I just work hard, mind my P's and Q's, obey the law, live by my best principles, watch my diet, brush my teeth, exercise regularly, don't drink too much alcohol, tend to my marriage and career, carefully rear my children. If I follow these basic rules and live like I should, then I will sail through life and everything will, well, basically work out for me. Now, this tape and narrative is fine, except that, life doesn't work that way. I can say this with certainty because not only have I been rattling around this unpredictable and dangerous and beautiful creation of ours for now 65 years, it's because I've been a minister for more than 40 years, and my job in that business, same for Tom, is helping people to come to terms with all of the random, unexpected, and sometimes profoundly painful and unfair realities that suddenly intrude into their lives. Just one heartbreaking example from my own personal circle. I have a dear friend, his name is Drew, who was recently, to use the golfing metaphor, at the absolute top of his game. He was happily married with wonderful kids, his career going along fabulously. He was widely respected in his community, a wicked hockey player, picture of contentment and health, when all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, he was diagnosed with an aggressive strain of leukemia. Now, instead of effortlessly sailing along, he is fighting for his very life and future. And things look good, actually, right now. But in just a heartbeat, everything changed for this dear friend of mine. And so, as you know, it can be for any of us. Tell me if your life is any different, but where I live on this planet, we'll be happily playing along some broad and gentle fairway when all of a sudden some capricious monkey comes out of nowhere, snatches our ball, and deposits it in some difficult, rough place. This is a difficult universe, unpredictable, and we are not in control. And just as in the case of these mischievous Calcutta monkeys, and here's the second aspect of the story I think is instructive and rings true to me. While it is undeniably true that sometimes our ball is capriciously dropped right in the rough, many other times actually, and this we must never spiritually forget, many times our ball is graciously placed right next to the pin where all we have to do is tap it in. I passionately believe that this remarkably open and fluid world of ours holds at least as much amazing grace and good luck as it does misfortune and difficulty. And I, for one, and this is one of my core theological and spiritual beliefs that guides my ministry and in my interaction with my world, I do not believe that this creation has some sort of overriding purpose or intention or plan, any more than those monkeys knew what they were doing on that golf course in Calcutta. Creation is not out to get us, neither is it out to offer us a free ride. Creation is full of random and unexpected events and outcomes, and there is no way, and no matter how diligently we play by the rules we think are in place, for us to make ourselves immune from these ups and downs. We cannot control, even if we wanted to, the pleasant events and wondrous outcomes that come our way, like meeting the love of your life on a commuter train some typical morning, or having all three of your kids grow up bright, charming, and healthy and successful. What's the chance of that? Or through no discernible competence on your part, fall into the job you've always wanted, or be a lucky enough driver, as I have been for more than 50 years, to never have more than a bump on my fender of an accident. Or even, there is simply no accounting in this life for the good luck and abundant, undeserved grace that comes our way. And as I've already said about the other side of life's equation, so too it is with unpleasantness. We cannot control the difficult outcomes, most of them, that come our way, like developing, as so many of us do, at some point in our lifetimes, a life-limiting or life-threatening disease, or injuring yourself with a stupid fall at home, or having a marriage fall slowly apart despite your best efforts, or losing your job because of global economic conditions, or having a son or daughter get into trouble with drugs or struggle with mental illness. No matter how careful or competent or clever or Unitarian Universalist we are in our lives, no matter how diligently we follow all the rules we imagine that are in place, we cannot control most of the difficulty that will come our way. And I just need to insert this. Any New Age guru who says, so what is it about your life that has made it necessary for this difficulty to flow into your life right now? Tell them that's crap! Life on this planet is a lot like that chaos-infested golf course in Calcutta. Weird, wild, wonderful, woeful, and wondrous things happen to us for both good and ill, and the sooner we accept the fact that we are not in charge, the sooner we move ahead to finish the game with some sort of wisdom and grace, the better off we will be. And I would pause here after making this fundamental assertion about life to make another crucial observation about this story. I think we human beings are far better at paying attention and cataloging in our psyches the misfortunes and unpleasantnesses that come our way, like when some monkey throws your ball deep in the rough, than we are noticing and taking into our hearts with the same eagerness for cultivation the amazing grace and blessings that regularly come our way. Let me speak personally for a moment. I think it's apparent I'm a hopelessly optimistic, cheerful, and energetic man. This optimism, some of my closest friends and family find very irritating. Like when I bound out of bed, my poor husband, I bound out of bed at 6:21 in the morning, ready to go. Hello, Collins, ready to go, yeah. And yet, in spite of this characteristic Alexanderness that I have, I know that in my daily life I am quick to notice and grumble to myself and, yes, complain to my long-suffering staff about any number of inconveniences, difficulties, and challenges that randomly come my way, like the toilet handle that came off in my hand the other day in the master bathroom, or the flat tire I had on A1A on the island off of Vero Beach. I was biking and I said to myself, gee, I haven't had a flat tire for 3 months. Or the knee pain and arthritis that crimps my style and makes me limp. Or the unexpected weekday interruptions in my office that prevent me from accomplishing my already crowded work plan. Tom knows this, that if the parishioners would just leave us alone, we could get our ministry done. I can only say that because I'm 1,800 miles away from Vero Beach. And what's more, despite my best efforts to try to spiritually and emotionally notice and be grateful for the good breaks and blessings that come my way, I am nonetheless routinely more reluctant to acknowledge how very lucky and blessed I am. The breeze that is so often at my back, the kindnesses and courtesies that come my way, the beauty of this natural world, even on a cloudy, cool day in Salt Lake. My God, look at this world I am given. The good night's sleep that blessed me in rest last night. I'm less likely to notice all of that, to be mindful about all of that, than I am the complications. Why aren't I always whistling generously and enthusiastically in my heart for all the little monkey blessings that come my way, and put my ball well into the fairway and close to the pin? And so I pose this spiritual question to you, each of you. How are you doing with this mindfulness in your life about the blessings, the graces, and the difficulties? Which do you pay more attention to? Are you mindful of both? Spiritual health lies in being mindful and appreciative of both. And there's something else here that is very important to remember about grace and difficulty in our lives. Recent studies about happiness from psychologists at Harvard and elsewhere, and many of you have heard about these recent happiness studies, conclude that we human beings consistently overestimate how happy or unhappy respective things will make us. We overestimate. In his wonderful book, Stumbling on Happiness, Dr. Daniel Gilbert, he's now in all those Prudential ads about, do you have enough money to get to the rest of your life? Gilbert writes this: what we have been seeing in my research over and over again is that people have an inability to predict, that's the key phrase, an inability to predict what will make us happy or unhappy. Few of us can accurately gauge how we will feel tomorrow or the next week. People, he writes, routinely overestimate how future successes or failures will affect their happiness, for better or for worse. The truth is, he goes on, bad things do not affect us as profoundly as we expect them to, and this is true of good things also. In other words, he writes, the good isn't as good, and the bad isn't as bad as we think it's going to be. Our research, he goes on, simply says that whether it's a pleasant event or a difficult one that occurs into our lives, both will matter less over the long term than you think they will in terms of your happiness or your sorrow. And then he goes on, and this is the key point that I'm trying to make today. The truth is that regardless of what happens, good or bad, here's the key word, adapt very quickly, he writes, to either. So, he says, the good news is that going blind is not going to make you as unhappy as you think it will. And the bad news is that winning the lottery or getting the new Lexus is not going to keep you happy either. And why is this? The answer, according to these behavioral scientists, is simple. We human beings, and now I quote them again, are generally unable to recognize that we adapt pretty quickly and pretty well to new circumstances. We seem unable, they conclude, to predict that we will eventually successfully adapt to either extreme. And thus I arrive to what, in my heart at least, is the crucial emotional and spiritual point of learning to golf with monkeys. And that is the supreme value of an adaptable heart. The supreme value of an adaptable heart. This Unitarian Universalist minister is passionately persuaded that emotional survival and spiritual success over the course of our lives depends, as it did for those Calcutta golfers, on our willingness to adapt to unforeseen realities, both positive and negative, that we cannot, despite our best efforts, control. In other words, just as the Calcutta golfers wrote their monkeys into the rule book, we must write into our hearts a willingness to adapt to both the batterings and the blessings that will come in to our lives. One little example, if I might. A few years back, Collins and I owned a home on the eastern shore of Chesapeake Bay. We were across the street from the bay, and there was about a 25-foot bluff, and there were all these million-dollar homes right along the water. Well, a hurricane came up the Chesapeake, and because it narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, the water rose 25 feet. There was flotsam and jetsam on the top of their lawns. And we woke up in the morning, and all of those lawns, 40, 50, 60 feet yards, were gone. And so all of those homeowners were facing anywhere from $150,000 to $500,000 of railroad ties. My neighbor across the street, Jinx, had 500 dump trucks of gravel brought in, and it cost him about $250,000 to restore his property so that his $1 million home would be worth something. So the morning of the hurricane, I go over to commiserate with Jinx. He was a retired military guy, and we're standing on the precipice of this new cliff, looking down, and I said, "Oh, Jinx, this is terrible." And Jinx said to me, "Well, yeah, it's going to be a costly mess, but look, I now have a beach to play on with my grandkids." And sure enough, I looked down, and there was this sweet little sand beach that had never been there before. Here's Jinx saying to me, "Yeah, the hurricane took my lawn, but it gave me a beach." It's the old lemonade out of lemonades gig. Let me bring this all closer to home. Tom has already mentioned, I can't run anymore. For most of my adult life, I was an avid runner. When we did those exercises about, name yourself, I would say first I was a runner or then a minister. I was addicted to it. I loved it. It was my spiritual practice. I loved strapping on a pair of shoes and getting out. If I was traveling, I'd go to San Francisco and run across the Golden Gate Bridge, that sort of thing. Losing the ability to run was the most grievous loss of my life in some ways. But I still have dreams that I can run. I still, 15 years after losing that ability, I still dream about it. But what I've discovered is that, like my neighbor with the new beach, cycling has opened up new glorious worlds to me. The mindfulness practice, riding, is even better than that of running. And I absolutely love cycling now. I've adapted. And if I ever can't cycle, then I'll swim or do aqua aerobics or do something else. I will adapt because I've learned that adapting is the way to be happy and well. And speaking of cycling, I want to give one more quick example. I lived in Washington, D.C. I lived downtown, and my big suburban church was about 11 miles up the Capitol Crescent Trail. So every morning I'd get on my bike and I'd commute to work. And every morning I'd see this guy going down to his job in Washington. And he was rather unremarkable, about 48 years old, but he always had a big smile on his face. And the other remarkable thing about him was his bike. it had a pair of pedals in front of him, and he was pedaling this way. Because, of course, he could not use his legs. He was a paraplegic. And I always marveled at him, just pumping away, having lost something that most of us would grieve grievously. He was happy as a clam, riding bike. Bicyclists tend to be very stupid people. But this guy was just happy. And every time I would see him, I would think of this quote from Albert Camus. Yes, there are deprivations. There are deprivations which give rise to our worst sorrows. But what does it truly matter what we have lost when what we have lost is not yet used up? Let me repeat that. But what does it truly matter what we have lost when what we have lost is not yet used up? And then Camus goes briefly on. There are so many things susceptible of being loved that surely no discouragement can be final. To know how to suffer, to know how to love, and when everything collapses, to pick it all up again, simply richer for the suffering, happy almost in the awareness of our difficulty. In a similar vein, Rabbi Harold Schweiss of New York City tells about handicapped violinist Yitzhak Perlman in this story poem. The rabbi and his wife attended a concert. We have seen Yitzhak Perlman, who walks the stage with braces on both legs on two crutches. He takes his seat, unhinges the clasp of his legs, tucking one leg back, extending the other, laying down his crutches, placing the violin under his chin. On one occasion, the rabbi goes on, one of his violin strings broke. The audience grew silent, but the violinist did not leave the stage. He signaled the maestro, and the orchestra began its part. The violinist played with power and intensity on only 3 strings. With 3 strings, he modulated, changed, recomposed the piece in his head. He retuned the strings to get different sounds, tuned them upward and downward. The audience screamed delight, applauded their appreciation. Asked later how he had accomplished this feat, the violinist answered thusly, "It is my task to make music with what remains." A legacy mightier than a concert, this. Make music with what remains. Complete the song that is left for us to sing. Transcend the loss. Play it out with heart, soul, and might, with all the remaining strength within us. Some of you may know that there have been recent studies about successful aging, and every one of those studies shows that people, it is the adapters, those who are willing to incorporate new information about the limits of their lives into their living, who are successful and happy. It is the adapters, those with supple hearts and adaptable souls, who are happiest and have the best relationships and, yes, live longer. All right. I've been at this sermon for almost 30 minutes now, and time is definitely wrapping up. Now, way back in seminary, I had the most distinguished homiletics professor, Dr. Joseph Barth. He had had throat cancer, so he could barely speak, and one of the classes after I had preached, he said this to me, "Kid, in a sermon you got to do this. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them." We have arrived at the point in the sermon where I'm going to tell you what I've told you. Life is often hard. Life is often difficult. It is unpredictable, it is chaotic, and it is most certainly unfair. Random things happen that throw us for a loop, wreak havoc in our lives, and render inoperative all those sure and secure rules by which we try to routinize and make sense of our lives. In a creation as open and fluid and dangerous as this one, we cannot control these things. We are not masters of outward circumstance, but we are in charge of our inner lives. We can control how we react and proceed. We can align the camber of our hearts that will allow us to bravely and creatively adapt. Like the golfers in Calcutta, we are free to stay in the game and be a player in our own unfolding, unpredictable mess, sharing it with the monkeys. But we need to remember the key rule. Always play the ball where the monkey drops it. Now, some of you are going to go home in a few minutes after coffee, and your errant and foolish spouse who stayed in bed to read the Sunday papers, when you come in the door, he or she is going to say, "Hun, how was church today? What did you learn?" And so we got to practice this. Okay, you're going to say, "I learned to play the ball where the monkey drops it." Are you ready? "Hun, what? Take your time. Hun, what did you learn in church today? And what did you learn?" Let's try that once more. "Hun, what did I learn in church this morning?" Tom, I think they've got it. My work is done. Amen.